Hey, it's Tony Brueski, and this is our week in review over the weekend, taking a look back at some of the most compelling conversations and stories that we've covered for you of the last week. Brand new episodes back Monday morning, bright and early, 5 a.m. here on the podcast.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Brueski.
Stories of shady behavior by the Murdaughs in Hampton County didn't just start with Alec. It goes way, way back. In all this week, we're going to be taking a look at the Murdaughs and their near century of influence of the residents of Hampton County, South Carolina. To take us there, Michael DeWitt Jr., award-winning editor of the 144-year-old Hampton County Guardian, joins us. He's also authoring the book Fall of the House of Murdaugh, to be released later this summer. Eventually, Alex comes around. What do we know about Alex's younger years, his upbringing, his personality, and you know the way he conducted life prior to the Alec that many of us came to know here in the last year or two?
I think to understand Alex, I think we do have to understand his ancestors.
Yeah.
When we assume that this family has always had wealth and power, that's not 100% true. The first Randolph had money, had family wealth and connections. Well, the Great Depression kind of crippled the Murdaugh family just like it did everybody else. So when Buster was a young man, his father, Randolph Sr., was broke. He lived on week to week on a solicitor's paycheck, and Buster actually had to work and scrape to become a lawyer. Buster went to Carolina on a football scholarship. That's the only way he could pay for law school. He went on a football scholarship, and he was said to be a good football player. Then generations after that, Buster builds the family wealth back up. He was in office, solicitor's office for 46 years, and he builds up. And meanwhile, the law allowed, double dipping. He could be a personal injury lawyer, and he could, be solicitor.
Okay.
Back then. That law has since changed, but so he was making money on both sides of the law, and he built that family wealth back up so that Randolph III and Alex's siblings, they enjoyed a life of wealth and entitlement and privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Buster had to work for it. Now, they all had to work to some degree, obviously. They're talented lawyers. You don't just walk into a courtroom and win a case.
Sure.
And, they don't just hand out degrees at law school, but nobody had to work as hard as Buster did. But then once Buster was in power, I meant to touch on this earlier, there were numerous allegations against him. They were in the Hampton County newspapers. They were in the state newspapers. He was accused of everything from tax evasion to stealing from clients to one woman. There's a case, and we can get into that later, but there was a case where a woman claimed that he stole her cows. But what's amazing about this is he gets away. Either he uses connections or legal maneuvers in the courtroom or whatever, but he gets away with all this stuff. He was charged by the federal government in the 1950s in a conspiracy, the Great Colleton County whiskey conspiracy. There was something like 29 or 30 people charged, law enforcement officers, magistrates. This whole the way it worked is the moonshiners had to pay off the cops and the solicitor in order to make moonshine and not be locked up. And most of these people went to federal prison, and he got away scot-free. And it just amazed me that the voters just kept turning out every 4 years and sending him back to office, despite all these allegations. So to get back to your question with Alex, I think that Alex grew up with this, sense of wealth and entitlement.
Mm-hmm.
He's got connections. His family name is behind him. And then he hears these stories about his grandfather, Buster, about, I imagine he sits on the front porch or at the hunting lodge with his dad and his family, and they're drinking bourbon and like, yeah, you remember the time Buster got away with this and Buster got away with that?
Yeah.
I'm not privy to those conversations, but I imagine that had a lot to do with the making of Alex Murdaugh.
I mean, even so much so as he named his son after this relative of his great grandfather. Is that who Buster, the original one, or is it grandfather?
Buster Randolph Jr. would be Alex's grandfather.
His grandfather, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Randolph III is his father.
Sure. So much so as to look back in such reverences. Let's name my kid after this individual who clearly had a lot of issues with the public, but was able to get away with so much. And I guess if you get away with so much, it just becomes legend. It becomes lore for you. And if you are brought up with that as part of your family life, and you've seen people get away with things like this, and it becomes almost legendary to a little kid, that's a recipe for, hey, I want to be like that someday.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting thing. Obviously the Murdaughs think that their ancestors were great men and heroes, and to some point they were, but they were flawed men.
Mm-hmm.
And people in the community, I can find 10 people of the older generation right now in Hampton County and ask them about Buster Murdaugh, and I'd say roughly half of them would tell me he was a crook, and roughly half of them would tell me, oh, he was a great man. And, maybe they're all right,
mm-hmm.
but it's a matter of perspective.
Sure. So Alex eventually comes along, and let's talk about his dad a little bit, though, first. What do we know about the history of Alex's father? Did he follow in the footsteps of his dad, or was he his own individual?
Randolph III, all right. The first generation, first Randolph was in office 20 years, mm-hmm. and he died in a train crash. Buster was in office longer than all of them. He was in office 46 years in the solicitor's office, and obviously in the private law firm even longer than that. Randolph comes along, and he served, his father served until he was, later years of life when the state mandated that he retire.
Mm-hmm.
So Randolph spent the first part of his career as assistant solicitor. He kind of worked under his father, in his father's shadow. And then when his father retired, he served roughly 20 years as solicitor, as his own man. And he always told me that he never wanted to be exactly like his father.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways he wasn't, but in some ways he was. They both really supported the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
He had the same kind of talent. He just wasn't as colorful and theatrical as his father was in the courtroom.
Okay.
And whereas I think Buster's flaws or weaknesses in his character had to do with greed and power and money. Randolph III was pretty straightforward in the courtroom. I think he had personal demons of a different nature that were his problems.
How so?
Well, I don't want to go into too much into the land of rumor, but certainly there are stories out there. There's a story about a strip club which we mentioned in the first podcast we did, the Wicked South podcast. There's lots of family drinking legends, and so I don't want to dive too deep without into rumor, but
yeah.
Things of that nature.
Okay. When does Alex start making his first impactful appearances, if you will, in public as an adult, and walk me up to that point a little bit? What do we know about his childhood and the way he handled himself with others?
Well, Alex went to public school right here in Hampton County, just like pretty much every other Murdaugh before him. They didn't put their kids in private school, which they certainly could have afforded. They kind of immersed themselves in the community. They went to school with the regular Joes, and that was to their benefit. These are the voters. These are the people who are going to sit on a jury one day. Why remove yourself from the local community? So Alex went to school, Wade Hampton High School, same school I went to. He was a few years ahead of me. I actually went to school with his younger brother, John Marvin. And Alex's mother was a teacher. She actually taught me. She was our middle school English and literature teacher. So the family is very much immersed into the local school district as students. Libby Murdaugh, Alex's mother, was a teacher, and then she was a school board member and a school board chairman. So classmates that I've interviewed kind of all had the same impression of him, that he was kind of a bully, but it was in a situation where if you were in his social circle, you were cool. But anybody that he deemed lesser than him, whether they weren't a cool jock, or they weren't in the same economic circle or whatever, they said he could be quite an ass and quite a bully. Then he goes, and the Murdaughs, let me tread carefully here, but they had a bit of a wild streak in school, that beer keg parties, things of that nature. We've heard about Almeda during the murder trial. Well, back when we were in high school, Almeda was the party destination. I think there was a field out there behind the house where after the football games on Friday night, if you were one of the cool kids in the in crowd, they all gathered there for bonfires and beer keg parties. And so that was the life, they lived. I've heard stories like if you were hanging out with one of the Murdaughs, you didn't have to worry about getting a DUI when you were leaving the party. You were good to go. But no major trouble like, the Stephen Smith thing or anything like that. Nothing that I'm aware of. It was just a life of entitlement and parties. And then he follows the Murdaugh playbook of traditions. He goes to USC Law School, fourth generation to attend the USC School of Law. And I think he's the third to play football there. So that puts him graduating. I don't have the exact year in front of me, but he finished USC School of Law, and after a year practicing elsewhere, he joins the family law firm.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Hidden Killers podcast with Tony Brueski.
There is much more to come with Michael DeWitt as we continue to discuss the long era and footprints of control that the Murdaughs had in Hampton County for nearly a century. Be sure to press subscribe so you don't miss any pieces of our conversation. New pieces coming out all this week, Monday through Friday, right here on the podcast. I'm Tony Brueski. Stay with us.